Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Maxwell School. My name is Chris Faircy, and I have the honor and privilege of being the director of the Campbell Institute, along with the Hicker Professor of Renewing Democratic Community. Today's event is part of the Tanner Lecture Series on Ethics, Citizenship, and Public Responsibility, endowed by Dr. W. Lynn Tanner. The Tanner Lecture Series invites leaders in their fields who have demonstrated through their life and work that generative efforts, even generative AI efforts, can enrich both our private and public lives. The lectures aim to stimulate audiences to re-envision their own civic responsibilities and to not merely inform, but also to engage and provoke, and to leave a lasting impression that influences future behavior. We would like to thank Dr. Tanner and his family for their generous support to this lecture series and the Maxwell School. I would also like to thank the Campbell staff, the tireless Jackie Niskanen and Kelly Coleman, for without their efforts, blood, sweat, and toil, these events would not be possible. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, the firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. I want to start by telling a little story. So I teach American politics here at Syracuse, and in a unit where we puzzle over why Americans don't vote more, we go over some usual suspects. Students throw out resource differences between those in the working class and people who are wealthier, time difference, time availability for people in different classes. They talk about mobilization, that interest groups, candidates, and parties tend to mobilize some groups and not others. But after we go through this list, I add one more. In the early aughts, I was doing policy consulting work in the city of Detroit for a state legislator. And part of my responsibilities is I had to go throughout our district and have these kind of coffee meetings with people in the district to hear any issues or concerns they had about government services, anything they wanted me to communicate to the state legislator. And it was around this time of year where I was doing this in 2002. And at the end of a meeting, as kind of a throwaway statement, I said, hey, everyone, thanks for coming out. Please make sure that on Tuesday you go and vote. After I said that, I heard audible laughter from the people in the room. And I had gotten to know some of these constituents, so I went up to one of them afterwards and I said, Mary, surely you're going to go vote on Tuesday, right? I was surprised that you laughed at my comment. She's like, boy, she called me boy. I was younger back then. And she said, listen, I live on a street where the street lights have not worked in 8 years. On any given week, the garbage might or might not be picked up. And last week, a neighbor came home. Their house was being actively broken into. They called the police, and the police showed up 2 hours later. She's like, what is voting going to do? I had no response. I said, Mary, thanks for coming. Take a cookie home. Enjoy the rest of your day. Okay? But the thing is, these issues of government failing to produce outcomes are not just unique to the city of Detroit. It exists at all levels of government. Nor is the lack of trust that Mary displayed and voter apathy restricted to working class constituents. In fact, it's a common refrain I hear from my students at the end of teaching Intro to American Government, who talk to me about witnessing a government who bailed out banks and not families after the Great Recession, who they see as failing to combat climate change, who, as they were students, produced an uneven and oftentimes frustrating response to a global pandemic. And the most common complaint I hear from my undergrads is a government and society that has failed to make going to college, owning a home, and starting a family affordable for their generation. Jennifer Pahlka in Recoding America helps us understand that this frustration is not a failure of civic virtue, but as a failure of how government works at the level where people actually experience it. She argues that our institutions are built to make and adhere to process rules, not to deliver results, and that even well-intentioned policies and civil servants collapse under the weight of outdated technological systems, a culture of risk aversion, and bureaucratic silos. When the government cannot fix a streetlight, or process SNAP or unemployment applications, or make a healthcare website that works, citizens don't just get inconvenience, they lose faith that government can act at all. Rebuilding that trust, she suggests, means not only reforming policy, but recoding government itself, redesigning how it serves people so that it earns their engagement and ultimately their trust. Our speaker today, Jennifer Pahlka, is a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and writes the popular Substack Eating Policy, which if you haven't read it, I recommend that you read it after this talk. She founded Code for America and as U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the Obama White House, launched the U.S. Digital Service. A recipient of the Skoll Award and other honors, she has been recognized by Wired for shaping technology and society. Ezra Klein called her book, Recoding America, one of the best policy books I have ever read, and the book I wish all policymakers would read. I would second Ezra's comments. Recoding America shows how outdated processes, not a lack of talent, block effective public services, and how practical, user-centered reforms can fix them. It's the roadmap for building a responsive, human-centered government in the digital age. Today's event will be divided into two parts. The first, Jennifer Pahlka will offer a presentation on governing in the age of AI. And for the second one, I was going to ask a couple questions, but you know what? I see the crowd, I feel the energy in the room. Forget it. We're turning it right over to you after Jennifer's talk. So we'll take questions from you for the remainder of the time. So I would like you to please join me in welcoming Jennifer Pahlka to the podium.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for the lovely and very generous introduction. This is a book in which the words state capacity never appear next to each other in that order, but I have been told that it is a book about state capacity. And while we are going to get to AI, I want to start with that concept, and it's going to overlap a little bit with Chris's opening comments. When I think about state capacity, I think about something that happened to me 2 summers ago. My husband, who is here, and I were back in Oakland. We have since moved to Virginia. We were in Oakland, California. And I was doing what I always do, Zoom calls all day, right? Finished a Zoom call, got up, went into our bedroom. Tim was not home. And there was a man there going through my stuff. He had come in the back door, which I had left open. It was a beautiful day. And I think he was not violent, but quite mentally ill. But it scared the bejesus out of me. I like to tell people that I very calmly left the house. Of course, I screamed and ran. I found myself outside with my cell phone in my hand, so I called 911. And I was on hold for 7 minutes, and then it hung up. And then I was on hold for 3 minutes, and it hung up. And then I was on hold for 5 minutes, and they finally picked up. And they said, of course, Oakland Police Department will be there as soon as they can. In Detroit, your constituent there had a 2-hour delay. For me, Oakland Police Department showed up 2 days later. It was 47 hours later. I felt very lucky that I didn't feel that the man was going to hurt me, as scary as it was. And I was able to sort of quickly go into curiosity about why this was. And I did a little bit of research. And of course, you find that not only are the 911 call centers sorely understaffed, and of course we don't have the police officers that we're supposed to have. It also takes a very long time to train these people and get them on board. Also, it turns out that depending on how you count, there's somewhere between 9 and 12 different oversight bodies that OPD reports to. There's a reason for that. Oakland Police Department has some very shameful history and need for oversight. But when you have somewhere between 9 and 12 different oversight bodies, it turns out you end up putting the same data into 9 to 12 different IT systems to satisfy these different oversight bodies. And the estimate is that between 80 and 90% of an OPD officer's time is spent on paperwork. They have to go through 19 different policies in their head before they can decide to pursue a subject. So they don't actually pursue subjects very often. It's very hard for them to adapt quickly to circumstances. And so as I sort of dug into why OPD and 911 might have failed in this way, it occurred to me that this had happened to me for a reason, because this illustrated the exact things that I had been diagnosing as what we really need to do if we want government to work. Sorry, here we go. These are not issues primarily of public safety policy. They are issues of state capacity, which, as you all know, is simply the ability of government to achieve its policy goals. Another way to put it in more plain language is it's the ability to say to get done what we say we're going to do in government. And just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs says you can't have self-actualization and self-fulfillment at the top of this pyramid if you don't have what's at the bottom, basics, food, clothing, shelter, I propose that government also has a hierarchy of needs. And what we care about is at the top of that pyramid, and that could be public safety, it could be economic opportunity, it could be national security, it could be housing. But the outcomes that we care about actually rest on something very important, and that is a fit-for-purpose operating model in government. Our operating model really is stuck in the industrial era. We've thrown some websites on the front end, so it looks like we moved it into the internet era, but we really haven't. And now we are leaving the internet era and moving into an era of AI, and we're gonna have to sort of leapfrog it into this new era. So when I say it's an operating model fit to today's needs, what do I mean? Operating model for me really is these four things. If you want government that can achieve its policy goals, you have to have the right people, which means that you need civil service systems that attract and select and retain and develop those people. They have to be focused on the right work, which means they can't be drowning in procedural bloat. They have to be able to spend their time, not 85% of it on paperwork, but on the meaningful outcomes and things that the public expects. Our police officers should be working the beat, not doing the paperwork. Third, they need purpose-fit systems, which means we need to be able to build and buy the technology that we actually need that does what we say it will do. And then the last, sort of most importantly, is we have to be able to operate in test and learn frameworks instead of being stuck with the plan that was created 20 years ago and slavishly executing to that plan, even as we can see that that plan is not working, that we don't have these feedback loops between our policy and implementation that allow us to act on what we're learning. And because that operating model is so outdated, what we really have is, instead of this beautiful policy implementation outcomes that we are supposed to believe in when we study government, we have sort of policy implementation and then what? Not sure, right? Sometimes we get not what we asked for, sometimes we get actually the opposite of what we've asked for. And we see that in so many other areas. So I started with an example in local government that's just very personal to one person, but I also worked on the unemployment insurance crisis during the pandemic, when it turned out in California when we got there, there were 1.3 million people who had applied for unemployment insurance and hadn't gotten it. We made a promise and we didn't, at least for those people, keep it. Now, we've been talking here today a little bit about how we want to also recognize how much good government does, and I don't even know the number. I think it was many millions did get it and got it quickly during the pandemic. We want to recognize the value there too. But so many people, when I came to California's Employment Development Department to help them clear that 1.3 million claim backlog, these people were calling their members of the California Assembly and saying, I'm on my last packet of ramen, what am I supposed to do? And these people were not able to help them until we could get through that. Everything, state capacity means everything from that up to the big bills that the Biden administration passed. We tried to connect homes through the BEAD program. We put $42 billion towards connecting people to broadband, and 3 years later, no homes had been connected. These programs all together, by the time that Biden left office, only 17% of those totals, actually, I'm sorry, this was slightly before he left, had been spent, which of course means that a lot of these funds were clawed back. We see problems like the FAFSA. I love talking about FAFSA here at a college campus because you all know what I'm talking about. You have an intention from Congress that says through the Better FAFSA Act, we want to make this an easier process for students to apply for financial aid. That triggers what we call a modernization, and I will put that in heavy air quotes. I always say modernization in air quotes, which results in literally millions of students not being able to access the financial aid that they need. We said we were going to build enormous amounts of green energy infrastructure, and yet when we fast track a project, this was a wind farm, I believe, it gets approved 17 years later. These are the kinds of problems that we're facing. And if you care about national defense, which I know some of us here do, I spent 4 years on the Defense Innovation Board. We have things like these ships, that by the time they're delivered, not only are they buggy, but that we actually don't need them anymore. The world has changed and it's moved on. We're not as secure as a nation as we need to be. So why are we having so much trouble achieving our policy goals? I won't go in, there's a lot that we could say about this. I'll be as brief as I can be. But I'm always reminded of my friend who worked at the Department of Treasury telling me this. I thought it was just a good articulation of it. Congress tells us to do a thing and do it by a deadline. The compliance offices stop us from doing it. She meant a lot of things when she said that. I think she was particularly complaining about being told to hire a bunch of people to implement a new program that had come from Congress, and being told 7 months into a hiring process that the hiring authority that they had chosen was probably the wrong one and they needed to start over. Really what's happening here, and I realize I'm at a university, I'm going to use third grade language, forgive me, is that we have the wrong balance between stop energy and go energy. It's as if we've said, or Congress has said, hit the gas. We're going to run towards green energy. We're going to run towards reshoring chip manufacturing. But the brake is still on, and the emergency brake is on, and maybe we're towing 7 tons of steel behind us. And the result really is a car where we're just, we're grinding the gears and turning the engine. And I want to be conscious that, I believe that public service is the most valuable and meaningful and rewarding career. And I don't want to give it a bad name, but I do know a lot of people who've worked in public service who feel that sense of their gears grinding, that they've come in to serve the public, but there's so much holding them back. Why does this happen? My colleague Nick Bagley has a wonderful paper that you should all read called The Procedure Fetish. So what he says is really we have anxiety about legitimacy and accountability. It's natural anxiety. Does the state really have, can it do this thing? Who is making decisions and why are they making them? And from that anxiety, we try to paper it over with a process or a procedure. So we didn't just make a decision, there was a procedure there behind it, which is all well and good, each one individually, but as you add on procedure by after procedure, you progressively overburden the state, and you end up moving so slowly sometimes that in fact you have exacerbated the problem you're trying to solve and increased the anxiety about legitimacy and even accountability. And at the legislative branch, we have the same problem essentially, but sort of a little bit different. People in Congress or a state legislature, they don't actually trust that the executive branch agencies are going to be able to do what they tell them to do. And so they get ever more specific about the laws that they write, which of course puts the agency often in the position of, well, I'm just going to do exactly what you said because you told me exactly what to do here, and focus again on the process instead of the outcome, leading to this implementation gap and again this increased anxiety. So you have these two downward spirals that reinforce each other, and we need to reverse both of them and start pulling back up the other direction. When I talk with folks in public service, this is the concept that they very often are actually using in their daily lives. It's the idea of the cascade of rigidity. At the very top, our law and policy is often actually written with just a particular outcome in mind, with just a high-level intent. But as that cascades into regulation and rulemaking, the creation of the processes and procedure, and then how it's actually being implemented on the ground, it gets ever more rigid with each step down, right? So this is how you get something like merit system protection principles. If you read them, they're fantastic. There's nothing wrong with them. They describe the system that we would all want to use to select and retain our public servants. But on the ground, actually, what it's translated into is a system that does not actually often evaluate the people that it's trying to hire, that uses just very high-level procedures to vet folks, choosing them on the basis just of whether they put the right keywords in their resume. And what's really happening on the ground, in fact, is entirely inconsistent with the high-level principles that Congress set out for us. Another good example of this would be NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Do you know that NEPA really doesn't say much at all? Mark Dunkelman, who wrote the book Why Nothing Works, which I also highly recommend, told me once, it basically says that two bureaucrats should kibitz once a year about the direction of the federal government's influence on the environment. That's it. It's a very, very high-level thing. What does it look like now? This is like one very oversimplified diagram describing how we would review each individual project that needed to be permitted to understand its implications on the environment. Again, NEPA never even specifies per project review. But now we have about a 4-year process. We create about 4,000 pages to review a project ostensibly under the auspices of NEPA. What you see here really is essentially the law and policy we think of as sort of these magic words. We speak those magic words and then things happen. But much like Mickey in Fantasia, he spoke the magic words to get this broomstick to help him carry water, but then he sort of falls asleep, and when he wakes up, he's being drowned in water. This is what happens when we let this policy and procedure accumulate over time. Another example of that would be the DoD 5000 series framework. Brent, you can correct me if I get this wrong, but I believe it is about 53 years old. When it was written, it was 7 pages. Any guesses how many pages long it is now? 2,000. It has not made procurement in the Department of Defense better. It has made it worse. That is why we are getting ships that no longer serve the need by the time that we are actually delivered. Let me back up for a second. When something sort of grows unchecked, in our body, it's usually cells, right? What do we call that? We call that cancer. I'm not the only person to think about the unchecked growth of policy and procedure in government as cancer. Elon Musk thought about this as well. This is a quote from the Times as he said to somebody, Steve here is Steve Davis, who is the sort of business leader that had helped him do the cuts at Twitter and I think also at Tesla. He brought him in to help cut the workforce under Doge. And he said this to the New York Times, Steve is like chemo. A little chemo can save your life. A lot of chemo could kill you. I mean, I took it personally. I happened to be going through chemo when this all happened. I had cancer. And I really thought about it. Like the chemo was extremely unpleasant, but it did actually save my life. And we did need to stop the unchecked growth of something in my body in order for me to be able to continue. Of course, you got to get the chemo right. And what we did in Doge is that we cut the workforce. We didn't actually do the work to cut that policy and procedure that keeps the workforce busy. So what are the ways that we can cut that work so that the workforce that remains can be focused on what matters? Well, I'm going to go back again to things like unemployment insurance and what I learned during the pandemic. Here's the thing I learned most. It wasn't in California. It was in New Jersey. This is Rob Asaro-Angelo. He's the commissioner for for labor in the state of New Jersey. When he was called up in front of the New Jersey legislature to explain why they had a backlog in unemployment insurance claims, and of course every commissioner was called up and screamed at by the legislature, he brought with him these boxes. And they're labeled, in case you can't read it in the back there, US DOL Active Unemployment Insurance Regulations, 7,119 pages. And he said, you want a system that can scale up to 10x or 15x the number of claimants in like overnight? It can't be that complex. That complexity creates that fragility and that difficulty scaling. I would love to see large language models used to reduce those 7,119 pages to some number that is the right number. And I don't know what it is. Maybe you all can tell me. How many pages should it take to describe a program that gives you some number, some amount of money for some number of weeks under certain circumstances when you lose your jobs? Anyone want to throw out a number? I'm just curious what you all think that. How many?
2 to 5.
2 to 5. I've never heard that low. I love it.
Less than 15.
Less than 15. I usually hear like 100 or 200. Huh? 100. Yeah. These are all good numbers. These are all numbers that are far better than 7,119. But we'll get back to that in a second. Large language models can help with the reduction of this proliferation of law and policy. In San Francisco, we've been helping them do that, or at least just by connecting the city attorney there with the Stanford Reg Lab. Their problem isn't unemployment insurance regulations, it's that they became famous or infamous for the $1.7 million toilet. Do you all know this story? How do you get to $1.7 million to build a toilet? Well, that is a question that would take a really long time to answer and describe, but folks like David Chu, the city attorney, has actually been digging into this. He's actually really trying to figure that out. And one of the things that they did was used a large language model to look at just a couple of simple things. One is, how many boards and commissions are there in the city? And I'm now going to forget the actual number, but they tried several times to count this in the 16 million words of the San Francisco Municipal Code, and they could not come up with a consistent number. This STARA model, Statutory and Regulatory Review Assistant, that Stanford has developed, that is a custom-designed LLM to take in these large volumes of law and code and help you parse it, came up with the accurate and correct number. Okay, I think it was 144 boards and commissions. They also looked at the number of required reports. In this case, it turned out to be 520 something. Now, these are reports that somebody at some point wrote into law, like we need a report on X. And because, as we do, we create a requirement, but we never go back and remove it, there were requirements for reports on things like newspaper stands that literally don't exist anymore. But somebody still, by law, has to go write that report, which is time that they are not spending on what the public actually wants them to spend it on. But think about those 16 million words or those 7,119 pages. Like, you simply cannot do that work without the use of the tools that we have today, which is one of the reasons I'm just incredibly hopeful about this particular moment. And I hope all of you coming into the workforce, coming into public sector leadership will think about what is possible now that wasn't possible yesterday and do something with that, because this is a problem that desperately needs solving. Now, AI, I've talked about one use of AI. It is not even probably the use that you mostly think about. When people think about public sector AI, they're often jumping to the conclusion that we're talking about AI making benefit determinations or something like that. There's a wide range of things that we can use AI for in this problem of fixing our state capacity. But it's not just a tool, right? It's a lot more than that. So this is just reminding us that we have to sort of leapfrog from the industrial era into the AI era. What we missed in the internet era was that, much like AI, the internet was not just a tool to help us deliver services better. This is my colleague from the UK, Tom Loosemore's definition of digital. Applying the culture, processes, business models, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. The point about AI right now is not just that we have new tools in our hands, but that the world is changing and that the expectations and needs of the public will be profoundly shaped by what AI does in our society. They will have expectations of better service, but they will also have different needs because it's going to reshape our economy and our society. So AI is both a tool, and it essentially is simply the bar we must now meet, and that bar is continually going to be moving. So when we think about AI, I described my four elements of the operating model. People think, well, of course, it's in that purpose-fit systems element. But it's not, it's everywhere, right? Yes, we need to use AI to deliver services better, but think about that first and probably most important element, having the right people. Well, AI can help with the problems like, poor state of Maryland has 4,500 job classifications. Again, good luck working on that without a tool like that. So it's a tool to drive the kinds of simplification reforms we need, but it's also changing the skill set of the people that we need to hire. We have to think about it in that way too. AI is just going to complicate everything in certain ways, and here are 3 ways. It reinforces the interconnections between all 4 competencies, because of course you can't successfully deploy AI without the right workforce, but you can't attract the right workforce without the modern digital infrastructure, right? It multiplies the urgency. It's simply essential for maintaining legitimacy that we use these tools, in my view. And of course, increases the competitiveness stakes. The nations and states that successfully integrate AI into governance are going to have significant advantages in economic development and public safety, et cetera. This is also where we talk about sort of the move from blue states to red states, and why is that happening? How might AI play a role in changing that dynamic? Now, I'm going to admit one thing. Everyone always asks, so if you're talking about AI, did you use AI to make your slides? I think you can tell by the poor graphic quality of most of them that I did not use AI to make them, except this one. I had asked it to help me with something I was writing up for a funder, and Claude just gave me this, sort of unbidden. And I thought it was pretty good work on Claude's part to tell me something that I wasn't actually asking for, and also to essentially be saying to me, it's an AI telling me this, it's not about AI itself. It's about the proper functioning of government, and that's the context we always want to keep it in. There are things that carry over from the internet era. I'm telling you, we're moving into an AI era, and we need to take that very seriously. But this is also the challenge of the internet era, is that we have believed that the process looks like this. We try to predict everything and plan everything and implement everything in a series of linear steps, and then we roll it out, or as they say, our friends in the UK would say, inflict it on the public. Or we can do this. Test the things that matter most, learn from the results, and do whatever it takes to speed up this loop. That was true in the internet era. It is going to be doubly true in the AI era. And this is what I mean by a fundamental shift in the operating model. It's not just using tools in a different way, it's fundamentally thinking about the work in a different way. And I think it's, at the end of the day, absolutely critical, because whatever you care about, this declining state capacity driven by that operating model of government that's out of date, and particularly driven by the accretion and accrual of procedural bloat over the past 50 years or more in our society, really underpins every other issue that you care about. So if you're here because you care about economic opportunity for others, or climate change, or I guess as I do now a little bit after my incident in California, that's not my top issue, about public safety, then you care at the end of the day about having the state capacity that we need. I will leave it there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much.
Mr. Jack?
So now how this works is that we have two people with microphones who will be roving around. If you have a question, we're going to prioritize students first. Please raise your hand. When the mic comes to you, please give us your name. If you're a student, your year and major or minor, and then we'll go from there. I also want to highlight that at the end of Q&A, there'll be a reception for everyone here out in the lobby, which is right out here to the right. There's food, there's drink, there's, most importantly, Jennifer's amazing book, which I encourage you to buy if you have it. There'll be opportunity for book signing, so please join us afterwards. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and either Jackie or Regan will come to you. Okay, Jackie, I think we have someone right here.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
A little louder, yeah.
Hi.
There we go.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed your talk. And I was wondering, so when you were talking about using AI to kind of get information that maybe we wouldn't be able to find from a really long policy, how can we, if we can't even trying on our own read the policy, how are we going to know that the AI is giving us the correct information when it is like narrowing everything down?
That's a great question. I think we need to check these things. I will remind us all that before AI, when we've had digital systems that have been programmed badly and we didn't check them, we caused great harm to people. And that simply is just going to be true in the AI era. So part of the test, measure, learn cycle is that you spend more of your time testing things and checking to make sure that they're correct than you do at developing them initially. But a couple points about AI and LLMs that can sort of navigate large volumes of policy and regulation. For one thing, one of the models that I'm talking about at Stanford's Reg Lab called STAR, it's custom developed to be very accurate. So it is not a standard LLM that will infer meanings, because in legal language that is, very dangerous. It does not do that. But also you are actually feeding it the thing that is searching. It's essentially a RAG, right? So it's not gonna, it tends to, I don't know if I should say it never hallucinates, but I don't know of any hallucinations, because it's not trying to make stuff up. It's only looking at what you've given it. It's not trying to infer stuff from all over the internet. But ultimately, I think I'll go back to where I started, which is we check. We always check. What it's helping you do is navigate all of that stuff, figuring, law and policy is sort of this crazy spider web of this that refers to this that refers to that. So if you said, I just want a simpler unemployment insurance system, you can't just, you have to actually follow all of those threads. It tells you where to go, but then you are actually reading the text yourself.
Thank you.
Wait, can you hear me? First of all, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate your presentation. I thought it was very informative. I'm curious, in your opinion, what are some successful examples of governments being able to build up state capacity, whether that's the federal government, state, local, or maybe an international government?
Yeah, we should not discount the incredible state capacity that we have, for sure. I think it's a pretty obvious thing to say that we did a lot during COVID, for instance, that was pretty remarkable. Everything from Operation Warp Speed to, the benefits that we did deliver. So there's certainly examples of that in our country. Unfortunately, we tend to do better at these things when there's a crisis, and we've got to get better at doing it when there isn't a crisis. In terms of international examples, I think it's really easy to jump to something like Estonia, where everything is easy to use, very streamlined digital interface, incredible, incredible back end that's just very thoughtfully built. And I think we should absolutely take inspiration from a state like that. And I'm talking about the digital part of it here, but it does carry over. The issue is that country is basically a baby country and doesn't have the policy and legacy, policy legacy debt that we have. It doesn't have 7,119 pages to describe anything at all. We have a different set of problems. And so when we think about creating the capacity to do things at scale and to be agile and responsive, we have to think about getting back to a state that is less burdened than some of these other countries that have been able to show what's really possible without that burden.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thank you. I'm just curious, how do you weigh the needed improvements and streamlining of state capacity using AI with the still really unknown risks associated with the environmental impact and employment impact of rapid AI use in society?
No, it's a great question. I would say I think it's one thing to advocate for the uses of AI to make the public sector better, and it is a different argument to say that AI should be used in other contexts. So, and I'm not saying I'm taking a stance really on the other one, but the urgency of public sector reform is very high to me, and I don't think that you're going to cause any job loss at all by using LLMs to simplify, to do, say, regulatory simplification. In fact, you may really, stimulate the economy by having just a better functioning government. To talk, though, about the workforce disruptions that are likely to occur from private sector use of AI is a big, hairy, meaty question that we could talk about, but there are other people probably better better suited to talk about it than I am. But I would not hold us back from using it in this context because of the possible negative externalities in another context, personally. On the environmental stuff, I guess what I would say is, and I don't want to sound like a full-on accelerationist, because I am not, but we do know how to manage, we know what we need to do to manage this climate crisis. We need to shift to a low-carbon economy. We're not doing that, not because we didn't have some political will for it, but because we've put all these barriers in the way. Like, we did not really implement the Inflation Reduction Act. We are not putting new green energy sources on the grid. In fact, time to connect to the grid, maybe it's finally gone up, but like over the past 5 years has gone down. These are problems of state capacity and sort of removing veto points and moving things more quickly. Given that I think the disruptions of AI are likely unavoidable, that just means that we absolutely we have to do what we know we need to do to move to a low carbon economy. And that simply requires a state capacity. It requires putting NEPA into the LLM shredder in a certain way so that we can build what we know we need to build and avert a climate collapse. Or mitigate a climate collapse, probably is better to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming today. I always appreciate a talk on improving state capacity. As you were talking, I was wondering a little bit about who chooses the model and who trains the model, and whether that might become a political battle over time. So my question is, or if you have some ideas on what the legislative or executive branches could do to safeguard the integrity of models like the NEPA shredder, as you call it.
Right now, what we've spent the most time around is the STARA model, Statutory and Regulatory Review Assistant out of Stanford, that's open source. And I think that's an important part of it. We have worked with governments that have used closed source models, and I'm sure there's a role for those as well. But having open source options out there that you can really trust, that come out of a university that really doesn't seem to have a particular ideological agenda behind it, has been really helpful.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks. I think I'll stand just so you can see me. So thanks for coming. I have a follow-up question to the one that was asked here, and then sort of a secondary point. So when you say that you don't think that this is going to disrupt like employment in the public sector, I guess I'm curious exactly why. Is it because we're not doing it, so you're not replacing a job by having somebody, like by having an LLM look at the at the statutes? So like, why is it not disruptive, I guess, to have that?
Well, the specific work of regulatory simplification isn't going to replace any jobs because no one is currently doing that job.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. So I just wanted to clarify.
I think if you were to play this forward in a very positive way and say, for instance, like, just to stay on the UI example, that we get to an unemployment insurance system described in somewhere between 5 and 100 pages. It's not likely we're going to get that low, by the way. That functions, just far more robustly than our unemployment insurance system does today. I still think you have people, doing that work and can shift to higher value work that actually helps people in times of need.
All right, thanks. And then my other question is about the sort of compliance side of things, because I think it's easy to say, 7,000 pages is too much, but 5,000 pages is probably too little, especially if you're talking about like the Oakland Police Department, right? So what's the role of AI or other, policy steps to ensure that the compliance component is still being done, right? And that there's sort of an equity review and maybe an environmental review after the fact, right? I mean, I've listened to a lot of Ezra Klein, and I get it. Like, you can't have 7,000 regulations on a solar farm, but you also can't have none. So that middle ground, is there room to have for AI or other policy processes to also be working on that compliance retrospective side, maybe?
It depends what you mean. AI does not solve the political problem of making choices about what is the right level of guardrails or checks or balances. That is a human problem and a political problem. Our political process will decide that. It just gives us tools to do things that we weren't able to set up those choices in ways that we haven't had in the past. I don't think the right amount of process is no process, for sure. We just have to get more clear-eyed about the costs of each step and say we can afford X number of steps or X number of checks here, which means that 6 of these things that would be a good idea in the abstract get cut because ultimately it needs to happen in a time frame that's actually relevant. These are just all choices. I think one of my favorite concepts that Ezra talks about is just, it's trade-off denial. We absolutely just, it's not that any of those things are bad. It's just that we can't continue to pretend that there aren't trade-offs in these decisions that we make.
I find your sense of hope refreshing, and I appreciate you sharing that with us today. And I have more of a broad brush question, not specifically about AI, but about kind of these ideologies and this vision for change, which also includes and involves AI. And I'm curious, with the gutting of the public service sector in many capacities over the past 10 months, what do you think it would take to restore trust among public service workers who have maybe lost their jobs, maybe feel undervalued, maybe feel like they're losing hope or losing purpose, or even just losing stability and support in this time?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I fundamentally believe in the motivations of public sector workers to serve the public. And I see it come back time and time again that if they believe that what they're doing will really help, they are the most motivated. I said before that I thought that DOGE had cut the workforce but not cut the work. Guess what? We live in a federalist system where we have the opportunity now to show what bold change would look like at states and cities, right? We don't have to just say that was the model for reform. Oh, it was bad. It didn't work. We can actually now go say, states and cities and counties can choose to try that bold reform where they actually put the simplification of the work first, and I think that will make public servants really excited. I think most of the public servants in federal government that I know, even those who were affected by the DOGE cuts and may feel demoralized by that, wanted some profound and transformational change. They didn't want this change, but they did want to change. We can still give it to them, right? In all these different areas. The federal government is not the sum total of our government. But we've got to have models out there that demonstrate it. And then, other states, maybe some state tries this, another state can borrow from it, a city. I mean, I talked about San Francisco. I was just in Denver, where Mayor Mike Johnston was faced with a pretty significant budget shortfall. And he did essentially a mini version of what I think DOGE should have done. And I hope that doesn't make Mayor Johnston sound bad. I think this is actually really great. Instead of saying, oh, we've got to cut people and there's just sort of a haircut across the top, he really went in and made folks focus on what needed to change that should have been changed a long time ago. He changed the work and then made the workforce shift to do that. He also, by the way, changed the civil service rules. Got a lot of crap for it, but he said we're going to lay off the people on the basis of their performance, not on the basis of their tenure. And actually, I think he feels that he's coming out of these cuts with a stronger civil service, a stronger city of Denver. And that's the kind of model that we want to be pushing up into states and the federal government, instead of constantly, instead of taking that what happened at Doge is what transformation means.
So as we're transitioning out, I want to just do a quick two-finger on that. So this has come up in a number of questions. How do you think about the partnership between human civil servants in AI, especially at that endpoint where they're servicing clients and beneficiaries?
Yeah.
In one world, like the AI is doing the kind of unglamorous work behind the scenes, kind of cutting regulations, and that allows civil servants to focus on clients, develop relationships, where maybe in the future this kind of human one-on-one service becomes a luxury good that the government can provide to people who are getting SNAP benefits or unemployment insurance. But there's also an alternative where, and this came up in a meeting before, AI in agent models are more patient with people than civil servants might be. They validate emotions pretty well at this point. So you can imagine people knowing that they're having an interaction with an AI government representative, they walk away, they feel all their questions were answered, they feel their emotions were validated, and also they're getting the services at the end of the day. So, I mean, those are a little bit kind of two poles. I don't know if some mixture or like what you see being the optimal relationship between AI and human civil servants and servicing clients.
I love your vision that the AIs are better than people in customer service. And I think that's just indicative of like how fast this is all changing. I mean, when we first started coming out, I think there was huge criticisms because of course it's not great yet. And it's like, right, well, it's just, you gotta wait, it's getting better. And it is getting better. There are so many uses that are like way simpler and sort of less sophisticated than that, like the fact that we have huge error rates in like say SNAP enrollment, for instance, SNAP eligibility, and it's because we make mistakes in things like the person's income, like the worker will register it as weekly, but it's really monthly, or monthly, but it's really quarterly or something. And you think of an AI assistant that just reduces the error rate on something like that. Hugely, hugely valuable. Still very much in the hands of the person. I think that I am now sort of open to anything up and all the way through. Like the AIs actually just be better at this than we are, which is fine. Nobody most of the time people do not enjoy calling, a customer service center. All the way through to, I think, even further than that, which is whether we think it's good or not, we kind of have to move in this direction, because think about stuff like fraud. The vectors for fraud using AI are going to be pretty gnarly, right? And if we're not prepared with the similar AI expertise inside government, it's an even more asymmetric battlefield here on dealing with fraud. So we've got to experiment with all these things. I'm not giving you like an exact answer, because I think that I would go back to that next to last slide, which is let's just try some stuff, right? You've got to test what is most important, and learn from that, and just speed. If we can just speed up that loop, we'll end up maybe where you are, where the agents are better, maybe where it's a little bit more of a meld between human and machine. or maybe something like that neither of us is thinking of because we haven't actually tried these systems in the real world yet. And yes, people are as unpredictable as the AIs.
Great, thanks.
Hello, thank you for your time. So I was wondering, as hyper-intelligent LLMs integrate into the government, in turn influencing the individuals within the country, will these LLMs be accessible to the people of the country? And what will this imply for the power balance between the government and its constituents?
I'm so sorry, but I think you're going to have to say it again.
So I think the question was, as LLMs get integrated into government services, will they be accessible to the public to use?
I think there's going to be a whole industry of folks that are using, so you'll have public sector AI, and then you'll have folks that are creating agents that allow you to apply for benefits or call the IRS or whatever. There's going to be a whole industry of that as well. If you're talking, though, about sort of transparency in terms of do we know what that LLM is doing, that is going to be a very complicated policy choice because these things are, they are not explainable in the ways that sort of technologies from the earlier paradigm are. And we're going to have to, and I think as somebody earlier said, we're going to have to invent what auditing looks like in a world where it's not going to give you the same answer twice.
So as we're transitioning out, I want to pull on that a little bit. You had mentioned the open source LLM. The potential draw for the government to award a contract.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I like that you're going there.
Right, is going to be tremendous, right? Like I just think like the competition among private companies to say, yeah, you can use this open source, but let us handle this. I mean, like that would potentially be one of the largest contracts you could imagine if someone was providing the AI services for the federal government. So how do you get people behind using an open source option when they can, help friends, right? Like, they have people who they came up with in the tech industry who are in their ear telling them that this is better and this will help their reelection because they can provide better services to their constituents than the open source they're using. How do you stop that siren call for policymakers?
Well, I guess one thing
or should you stop it?
Well, no, I mean, you don't know. I'm not opposed to vendors providing closed source models on principle by any means. I think there's sometimes that will absolutely be the right answer. We've already been working with the state of Virginia that used a company to do some regulatory simplification under the Youngkin administration, and it was a $150,000 contract. I think that's fine. I mean, they didn't go do a mega contract for $25 million for something that really shouldn't have been cost that much. That's the dynamic that we see in most of government technology is just ridiculous contract prices for things that are relatively simple. It may be that in this era, as more people are using LLMs in their daily lives, that we don't let this stuff get mystified in the way that technology development and government so far has been, right? There's been this sense that we can't possibly know what this would be. We have to let these experts at the company tell us what it will cost, even if that number turns out to be absurd. But if you can, if you're paying $20 a month for ChatGPT and you see that it does basically what this vendor is telling you to do, that may take a little bit of wind out of their sails. That said, I'm quite worried that that we fall prey to. There's a lot of snake oil out there,
yeah.
A lot, and there's a lot of folks doing procurements in government, particularly state governments, who are not asking the right questions and are going to pay a lot of money for very faulty models that they really shouldn't pay for.
Thanks.
Hi there. In the 1979 IBM Employee Training Manual, there's what has become a pretty famous quote, and it is, at a computer can never be held accountable, therefore a computer can never make a management decision. We see in things like algorithmic sentencing, for example, like in a criminal context, how that can create tons of harm, right? When a computer is making a decision. And something that has been addressed by a couple of the questions and from some of the things that have been said so far kind of goes in that direction. I guess I worry that the next logical step from using AI to simplify a regulation is using AI to apply a regulation. How do you safeguard against the potential that those choices could, substantially hurt people, and there would be no accountability towards the computer that's making that kind of decision?
Yeah, I think that's simply a choice we make. People are responsible for decisions. If you want to back what the algorithm says or make a different decision, if you're a judge, you're probably getting a recommendation from an algorithm and either deciding to go with that or go with something else. And that your decision hopefully will rest a lot on whether you think that algorithm is a good one or not. It is not that different from your gut, right? You are making a decision. If you were making it unaided, you are making that decision based on your past experience and the pattern matching that you've done in your own head. So you're just basically saying, my pattern matching is better than that algorithm's. I'm not going to tell you what you should do because the law has put that decision in your hands. But at the end of the day, people make decisions. They may choose to follow the recommendation of, frankly, a software program that isn't AI, right? Or an AI program. It is ultimately their decision. The worst thing that I really didn't like when these conversations about how to use AI in government started was everyone was like, we'll let the AI choose from the pool of candidates. We'll let the AI decide who we hire. And to me, that was an expression of the desire not to have made a decision. Like, so much of the dysfunction in government is that people don't want to have made a decision because that decision could be criticized. And that's especially true in hiring. It's also true in procurements in a certain way. And not only they might not just criticize, there might be a lawsuit over it. They might be accused of something. And to say, the AI will make the decision is just a way to double down on that dysfunction. Whereas at the end of the day, here's where it plays out. If you decide to let an AI recommend the person and then you hire that person, you have made the decision to hire that person, and you should stand behind that. And if you think the algorithm that helped you get there was valuable, great, stand by that decision. It's still your decision.
Kind of bouncing off my colleagues here question, I was wondering if you can kind of explain and help rationalize the use of AI in certain disability compensation programs. For example, the Department of Veterans Affairs, their disability compensation program uses AI to help sort out the paperwork that is attached by veterans onto federal forms. And the result of this is that half of the paperwork and provided evidence for corroborating these disability claims are being rejected by AI. And that creates an issue when moving forward in disability processes because they're not being reviewed by the administrators at all. So I guess how do you rationalize it against that kind of decision making? Because it kind of,
I don't know the specific one you're talking about, but I will tell you it is always difficult for me because the pre-AI state of affairs when it comes to, say, benefit decisions for veterans was terrible, truly terrible. If you're talking about a case, and I don't want to be like an AI defender here necessarily, but like if you're talking about a bad use of AI, to me that just doesn't read as any different from bad uses of pre-AI technology. I mean, state of Michigan, 2013, there was no AI involved in this, just badly programmed systems bankrupted tens of thousands of people because an error in the programming determined that people had fraudulently gotten UI benefits, and they went after them, and it was an absolute disaster. Because we do software badly in government, because of the processes that we use, to me, I can't see much of a difference between the story you're telling me and the Midas story in Michigan in 2013. To me, the solution is if you're going to use technology, you should use it responsibly. And by the way, you're going to need to use technology because you have more claims that need to be processed by people in need than you have people who can process them. Not because we don't have a lot of people working at the VA, but because you have allowed for enormous regulatory and process cruft and accumulation at the VA. The amount of time it takes to process one of those claims is far greater than it really needs to be because we have neglected the process and just sort of let it become, it's like that 2,000 pages of the DoD. Like we have to work on both of those things. But I can't particularly call out AI in a world where we've been doing that with regular old software for such a long time.
Thanks. And Jackie and Ree, if we can go to someone in the first couple rows, we got some folks up here. Great.
Hi, really like the talk. My question has to do about, it seems as though AI helping in procedural bloat is a little bit of a tunnel vision approach to kind of the problems that are in government. Do you see this as being the way forward in kind of building that trust, and it will be the kind of effect that we need, or is there multiple other things that potentially can be of a problem, and this use of AI for procedural bloat is kind of a band-aid to a cut that's it's just not closing? Do you see this as, I don't know, yeah, I'll end it there.
Do you mean that there's a wide range of uses of AI in government, or do you mean there's a wide range of problems and this is a narrower focus on one part of the problem, which is procedural bloat?
Yes, and then on to that,
yeah.
If the use of AI then expands to all the other issues, then it comes into the question of accountability of, like some other people were saying.
I wouldn't stand by that like procedural bloat is like the one thing that is like the source of all problems in government. I sort of situate it as sort of one of four major things in terms of the workforce, the bloat, the systems, and then the test and learn frameworks. So I do want to put it in context. But I also don't want to understate how difficult it is to run systems that have gotten that overly complex, and that the temptation to use AI to cover over for that complexity, because it's quite good at that, is a little dangerous to me, because we will end up with AIs talking to AIs and no humans understanding what is underneath that. And I think that is not consistent with my understanding of democracy. Like people need to understand this. Like you can't say, I'll go back to the VA example, right? Like it's gotten so complicated that we like don't even understand why this person got rejected, right? Like you actually have to go back and say, what is a reasonable process to decide whether this person is getting a benefit, and if so, how much? And is that something that is explainable? I do not by any means think that AI is the only tool to be used in regulatory simplification. What I'm saying is we happen to be in a moment in time where that tool is now available, and therefore it needs to like crack open a whole field of work that has been sorely, like, I wouldn't say sorely neglected, like a whole field of work that like is kind of new. Like people just don't do this. Like we don't subtract from our laws, we add. It's time to start subtracting, and now we have a tool to do it. Does that make sense? Did I convince you? A tad. A tad.
So as we're transitioning, I want to throw one idea that I think about every year when the calendar turns and I see TurboTax commercials and Intuit.
Yeah.
So many companies make money off of helping people navigate the bureaucratic complexity of like this, both the tax system and the social safety net. It is in the government's power, like some governments do, to send people a sheet of paper that said, here's how much you owe in taxes. Does this look right? Yes or no, right? Some countries do this. But they could also potentially say, here are the benefits you use, and here are the benefits you're eligible for. Is that one potential way to use AI, is that you have a reform in which people receive, again, thinking about end users, right? They receive right there, all at the same time across the country, this is how much you paid in taxes, these are what you're currently using. Oh, we notice you're eligible for programs A, B, and C that you're not enrolled in. Can we enroll you in these programs?
Great. I have a hot take on that.
Okay.
Well, first of all, let me just say that we are now becoming like the only developed country that doesn't have their taxes filed that way. Like Canada's just announced they're going to do it. UK already does it. Like, I mean, it's just like we're now like the last losers at the party on that front. We do not need AI to do what you just suggested in terms of benefit delivery. We just need data sharing agreements. I know agencies that have spent 4 and 5 years negotiating data sharing agreements. I would rather point AI at the problem of speeding those data sharing agreements, and I think what a lot of people have talked about here is just like getting at that culture of no. It is not illegal to share data across, actually, it is, at the IRS. So there's like one really hard and fast rule about use of data, taxpayer data, but so this makes it like a really big problem. But a lot of what you need to do to make benefit delivery like wildly streamlined and being offered to you in the same way that you would just get a thing, here are your benefits, do you want them? It's a human problem, it's a legal problem. That would benefit enormously from sort of this like just simplification. And then honestly, like normal computers can just do that. We do not like just normal software that like half the people in this room could probably write will do that just fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't use AI for it. I'm just saying it's not an AI problem. Data sharing is not an AI problem.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm a faculty member and I teach AI ethics and governance. So today in class, some of my students are actually here.
They're asking the hard questions.
Yeah. So we were discussing the dual use nature of general purpose AI and how it can be used to benefit people, but at the same time harm them. And in terms of state capacity, right now, I think we're also experiencing perhaps a dual use of state capacity. In some cases, it's violating people's civil rights. I'm thinking about people who are illegally or I guess, I don't know if it's legal or illegal at this point, but discriminated against and profiled by ICE, for instance. So one example just close to campus is that the university has installed automated license plate readers to help prevent vehicle theft and crime.
Yep.
But some students are concerned that the company that the university has contracted with doesn't have good data protection policy and has been used to cause arrests for deportation. Another example, speaking of data sharing, I work with the U.S. Census Bureau to help them with research. And
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's been really rewarding work, but a lot of us researchers are concerned about certain data sharing agreements that could be used again to illegally profile certain subpopulations. And so, yeah, how do we, whether technologically or through laws, regulations, prevent these types of uses that are quite anti-democratic.
I'll give you a hot take on that, and apologies in advance. The party that you support needs to win elections. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that a stronger law to protect X, Y, or Z, if it is not respected, does not make anything better, right? Like, I can give you 1,000 examples of people I know in federal government who, okay, we'll look at the Privacy Act. I got calls from the Hill after there were, I'll just say, assertions of violations of, personally identifiable information when DOJ came in, and they said, let's strengthen the Privacy Act. And I'm like, why strengthen the Privacy Act? They ignored it. Like, if the Privacy Act up until, let's say, yesterday, was the problem in that we couldn't use, it was, I think, unfairly interpreted to make it very hard to share data across agencies for the kind of use that I would consider beneficial, like getting people more benefits. What I would have done is actually, I'll say update it, not loosen it, but it was written in 1974. We probably should have dealt with that a long time ago. And yeah, we should actually make data sharing in government easier until somebody is in the White House that wants to use it for things that are inconsistent with your values. The reason I'll be kind of hot on the topic is because I think I share your values largely here, is that you have to fight those battles in the political sphere. At least that's what the evidence shows right now, is you've got to win on the politics so that you have the power to actually enforce those laws, and that making them stronger when they are ignored does the only thing it does is it makes it harder for you to govern when your party is in power. And yeah, I really actually, in the end of the day, believe that part of how we got into this in the first place was the sense that we didn't want, when the other party was in power, we didn't want them to have the capacity to affect their policies. The problem is that also means then you don't have the power to affect your policies when you're in power. And I think that has caused, to Chris's opening comments, real problems in our political process. So we're in that downward spiral. When Trump came into office the first time, I had foundations calling me saying, how do we autocrat proof these systems? And my answer is, you can't. Those are tools that can be used for good or ill, unfortunately. You have to win in the political arena. Sorry if it's a bummer answer.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time. Moving more towards the local level, being very familiar with OPD's many failings, how do we get...
Are you from Oakland?
I'm from the Bay Area, but
okay.
Yes. How do we get people that have already been burned by the system so much and that are traditionally very mistrustful of authority to trust AI when it comes in, when it's being handed over to the authorities that they already are don't want to see them, don't trust them as far as they can throw them. How do we break through to them?
That's a great question. Let me start by not answering it, but just amplifying it. I think too often people who've come into public service have assumed that the public on the other end is, going to experience the program that they have come into government to implement, and it is, as my friend Genevieve says, the beginning of a relationship. It is not the beginning of the relationship. People already have a relationship with government, and it is often a very painful one. And we cannot continue to design services that assume that it is the beginning. We actually have to overcome enormous barriers, I think, to their trust. I personally don't think that AI is the thing that builds or breaks that trust. I think it's good service delivery. I think it's when we say we're going to do something, we do it, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act or picking up the phone when you call 911. I think that is how trust is built, is you say something and you deliver. But I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, but I love the question.
Great. So that is the end of our conversation here, but the conversation is not over. As I mentioned, out in the lobby we have refreshments and food, so please join us out there, and then please join me now in thanking Jennifer Pahlka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys had great questions. Thank you so much.